Okay. Welcome everyone. This is the December monthly members call. The focus of the call today is the making quality applications in the Energy Redress Scheme. Graham will speak a bit more about the changes to the Redress Scheme which have been come in, which now opens up new opportunities for community energy groups specifically. So I will let Graham pass on the information more, but the idea behind today's call is to help the community energy sector access this large fund to deliver projects that we would like to deliver, and that includes projects around efficiency, but also other projects as well, which Graham will touch on a little bit more. So special thank you to our speakers and to all of the members attending today. I will just give a kind of quick introduction to the monthly members call before we go into our presentations. This is a new call series, so please do share any feedback from it, whether you've got what you wanted, whether you'd like to see something different from the calls. The idea is that we're connecting you up with the national network of members that are part of Community Energy England, and that you have the time to ask questions and to accelerate your work through the membership of the national network. So hopefully this space is really useful. As part of this call, we'll be given just a brief introduction to Loomio. So I'll touch on that in the next few slides, but thank you for being here. I'm sure you're all aware, but we are now over 300 members in our membership, and the idea is to connect you with each other and also with wider partners in the sector. How this will look today is that we'd like to really focus on the presentations and the question and answers. I'm sure everyone is coming with lots of questions and lots of information that they'd like. So just a quick arrival and welcome. I'll give an introduction to Loomio, and then we'll go straight into the presentations and the Q&A. As part of this call, you should have been given an email invite to our online platform for community energy. So please do let us know in the chat or by email if you haven't received an invitation to join the practitioner forum. This is your way of connecting up with other members nationally, beyond events and in between calls. So if you have not seen an invitation like this or created your account on Loomio, do let us know and we'll make sure you get an introduction after this call. This is a place where you can ask questions, anything that you want. You can share documents and files, and the idea is that it's a self-service connection with the sector. So I will now gladly pass on to our two speakers. I believe our first presentation is Graham from the Energy Savings Trust, who hosts the Energy Redress Fund. So Graham, if you'd like, I will pass on to you and your slides.
Excellent. Thanks, Shannon. Good to be here. I can see a few familiar names and organisations there, so I can see that some of you have already been involved with redress projects. I'm going to have a very quick gallop through the basics of it because I suspect that a lot of you will have some idea about what it is, but then I want to try and focus a bit more on some kind of suggestions and tips for getting applications through. So if we can have the next slide, please. So the absolute basics, that Energy Redress takes voluntary payments from private sector companies that have breached Ofgem rules. So when something goes wrong in the energy industry, Ofgem investigate, and there can be fines, there can be direct compensation payments, but alongside that, there's the option for energy companies to make a voluntary payment into redress to kind of say, you know, look, we appreciate something's gone wrong here, and we want to put some money in to help support the kind of people that might have been impacted by that. And we manage that on behalf of Ofgem to have a kind of open application process so that, you know, lots of different types of organisations can bid in for that funding. The amount of funding does vary. That's kind of important thing. We don't know how much money is in the pot at the start of a year because it comes in as and when those the investigations finish. So we try and get it into the fund and available as quickly as possible. So it does mean that we have to plan for a bit of uncertainty there, and the fund sizes have ranged between 200,000 and 20 million. So, you know, it can vary an awful lot. So part of the way that we manage that uncertainty is to have quarterly rounds. So we issue a call on a quarterly basis, roughly in those months, January, April, July, October. It can vary a little bit because sometimes other things can impact when is the best time to launch a round, but basically around those times, to help you to then plan and think about when are we going to make our application. The other thing that we do is get organizations to pre-register, because we have to do some due diligence on organizations that are going to bid in. So we do that. And we, on a quarterly basis. And then also we've then got, we can notify everybody who's interested in applying. So the funds, it must go to Ofgem regulated areas of energy use. So it does need to be energy specific, static energy. It can't benefit, a rule that's worth being aware of, can talk more about that later. It can't benefit any organization that might pay into the scheme, which does impact the way it interacts with things like supplier obligations, eco, warm home discount, PSR, and we can't match fund with anything that comes from energy companies either. There's information in the scheme guidance about that if you want to look at the detail of it. And we have 4 different funds. So 2 of them, the main fund and the small projects fund, those are actually only open to charities. I know there are a few charities in the sector, but I know that, you know, it's going to exclude a lot of you. And those are the funds that go to support energy consumers in vulnerable situations, particularly fuel poverty, but also can include things like health and disabilities as well. And the 2 funds that have now opened up specifically to community energy groups are the Innovation Fund and the Carbon Emissions Reduction Fund, which kind of do what they say on the tin: innovation to support energy consumers, or reduction of carbon emissions from kind of static energy that is within the scope of the things that Ofgem regulate. And the eligibility is opened out to community interest companies, co-ops, and also community benefit societies. So those are the legal structures that can apply to that, as well as charities. And for innovation and carbon emissions, it can be just to benefit energy consumers. Doesn't have to just be people in vulnerable situations. It can be targeted at them, but it doesn't have to be. So you can do things that are kind of addressing everyone. And I guess, you know, we've got, in the overall scheme of things of what needs to be done, we've got a relatively small amount of money. So what we try to do is fund projects that can have a kind of broader impact, that are addressing big kind of systemic issues, and can kind of have a broader impact through being replicable. Next slide, please. And so the funding is actually quite broad. So it can be staff costs, it can be capital. So we can fund installations of measures. We can fund up to 100% of project costs, so we don't require match funding. But the grants are paid quarterly in arrears on the basis of evidence. It's that kind of approach. And we can fund projects up to 24 months long, up to 2 years long. As I said, it should be energy focused. Although energy saving measures can be funded, we do have, as I said, those kind of limitations around eco, or any of the supplier obligations. So we want to be funding stuff that are outside of the scope of that. So we can't fund anything that's within the scope of eco. But things like, you know, renewables measures that are outside of that, you know, we're able to fund that sort of capital stuff. We could be supporting community renewables if you've got projects that you think fit the scheme criteria. We can also fund things like trialing new business models. So you'll hear a little bit more about an example of that in a minute, and developing new products and services. So we do have, you know, we've had quite a few applications in that are trying to develop a new business model to tackle some aspect of carbon saving. And those sorts of projects, you know, can fit the criteria pretty well, as long as you can kind of articulate what the impact's going to be. Next slide. So a couple of kind of high level principles it's worth being aware of. Our main guiding principle is to try and maximize the positive impact per pound of redress funding. We know there's although we're a relatively big fund for the sector, it's a small amount of money compared to what needs to be done on just transition to net zero. So we want to try and get as much impact as we can to quantify that and to actually then share that out so that we can start to build the evidence base for what works and what doesn't, and hopefully help to kind of increase the level of investment in some of the types of things that we fund overall. So we want projects that are kind of evidence-based, that really explain the need, what's the problem that you're tackling, and what is the planned impact. So we do want, where possible, to get either definitely quantifiable impact, or to be kind of really clear about what is the scale of long-term impact that could come about as a result of this project. It's good to have a strong rationale. Why do you think your scheme will work? I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. We want to avoid duplication, so we don't, things like energy advice, there's a lot of risk of duplication and kind of competition between people, and so we want people to work together. But also, if people are trying something new, the more that you can be really clear about what is the new aspect to this, what is it that's different about this, the better. So yeah, cost-effective projects with tangible outcomes. And we do build impact monitoring right into the application. Those of you that have seen it will know this. So we ask people about what targets do you have and how are you going to monitor those? And then we ask about that in the reporting, because we want to, where possible, be able to kind of really quantify how much gets delivered for this amount of money, in the hope of being able to kind of add to the evidence base. And also, as I said, replicable projects, so being able to share the lessons with other organizations and other people active out there is always beneficial. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Graham. Just to let you know, just a couple of minutes left, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. This is the last one.
Great, perfect timing.
So first tip, use the scheme guidance. Second tip, use the scheme guidance, because there's a guidance document that's there on the website. There is information in there that you need to see. There are things in there that could trip you up if you haven't seen it, around what the scheme rules are, how to make an application. So we do really encourage everyone to have a look at that. We know it's difficult to find the time to do that, so we've structured it the same way as the questions in the application form, so you can just use it as a reference document next to you and just be looking at the relevant section as you're filling it in. Be really clear. I can probably talk a bit more about all of this in questions, but try and be really clear about what you want funded. We know in some cases there's lots and lots of other initiatives going on all around what you're asking for funding for, and it's kind of helpful to know that context, and sometimes it can add value. But where you're doing a lot of that stuff, it can also get to the point where it fills so much of the word count that you can't get across enough information about the bit that you're trying to fund, or it can sometimes give the impression that this is a really wide-ranging project and there's not enough budget for it. So I guess just try and be really clear about which is the bit we want the redress funding for, and then just include a little bit of information about other context stuff around there. That's a problem that has come up with a few applications that come in. Be clear about how the project will be delivered. They're being assessed by people that are active in the sector, so people are very much interested in, is this practical, is it deliverable, and then kind of why it will work. So what experience have you had that shows you that this is the right way to do it? What evidence do you have that this is the best way of doing it? Very quickly, because I'm running out of time, I think, aren't I? Costing for staff, for core partners that are definitely working on the project, it's funded on the basis of gross staff salary plus overhead of up to 25%, unless you want to do a full cost recovery kind of approach. So if you need to work with consultants, they need to be procured. So we can pay commercial day rates, but only if that's being procured. And that's just the rules to kind of try and have a level playing field for everyone that's applying. But we do sometimes get people that miss that rule and put in commercial day rates for everything. Yeah, the last one is just that thing about explaining evidence and impact for the funding. But again, I can talk a bit more about that in response to questions if that's helpful. The one last slide is one that probably useful to refer to, which is just the contact details. So the website, there's loads more information. You can access the scheme guidance. You can see projects that have been funded in the past. So it's really worth having a look at that if you're interested in applying.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Graham. That was perfect. Just if anyone does have any questions, just a reminder to pop them in the chat. Lisa is taking those, and we will come to the Q&A section after we've heard from Andy from Energise Barnsley. Andy was invited to speak as the second presentation, as Energise Barnsley have successfully applied for the Redress Fund. I know there are a number of people in the call who have made an application to Redress previously and have been unsuccessful, so we wanted to make sure that we were showcasing an organisation that had been successful as well, and some learning from that. So Andy, I will pass to you when you're ready. Thank you very much. Thanks, Graham, as well.
Hello, and thanks very much for inviting me, Andy Heald, Energise Barnsley. I'm a massive cheerleader for the Redress Fund. I think it's the best opportunity we've got for funding for a long time, and it complements so many things which are good within the sector. So if I could go into my first slide, we just walked a bit. So let's talk a little bit about Graham and his team. Specialists, the people that got there administering the fund, some of them might be part of community energy, nice people. And when Graham said regarding your word count and keeping a simple story, you work with those people on your application, a bit of pre-application advice, and then it goes to these independent experts. So the whole mantra of big bad energy company gets fined, EST run the scheme to fund organisations, like everyone on the call, it fits well. So that it's nice to see that, and I say that as opposed to some of the other funds we sometimes get shoehorned in together. So this has longevity because they're doing quarterly submissions, so we're not all herded towards one sort of deadline, and particularly with non-energy, say, reasons for giving funding, which might have happened in the past. So I think for all of us, there's every possibility you can tee something up for quarterly if you miss it, or if there's not enough in that pot for that time, you can wait for the next quarter. So it does mean that we can all plan and not compete against one another. It's really, really good that they've now done these specialist pots of innovation and carbon emissions. And again, if you've got something which covers the two of them, you can get a little bit of feedback, which one it might be better to put into. And that might be just because there's more funding for that particular thing, or the case for carbon emissions equally as strong as the innovation. The feedback part of it is good as well. Again, when looking at some other funds, you might just get a flat no and not more than that, which is really disappointing after you put so much work into it. But there's nothing stopping you from going on to the next quarter as well. So, you can take that feedback, specifically sometimes, I think Graham said quite well, we do so many parts to our projects, social impact, the financing, the carbon emissions, they might say, look, you've got to condense it better than 250, 30 words, get that story right, because when the board comes to make the decision who to award to, they need a story there. And lastly, the thing I touched upon, it plays into our strengths. So we know that Ofgem, one of their remits is to look after the vulnerable, and we know we often work with them, and there's a changing local energy supply pattern, and we are players in that market. So it's this time where we can test some of our models, we can test some of our projects, and the ability when I go on to talk about our 1 million grant, we're raising a 3.25 million bond against it, and that wouldn't have happened 10 years ago. But there is now an audience which wants to fund these projects, and particularly if you have some grant funding in there. My next slide, if that's okay. So prior to receiving the recent funding, we partnered with Age UK Barnsley, the council, and Barnsley Homes, and then the NEA as our research academic to apply in the main fund. So that was Age UK Barnsley as a registered charity applying. And this was through the collaboration agreement. We also, at the same time, I know Mike's on the call, Staffordshire's Energy applied to their local charity to do a similar project with the same academic partner on it. So there'd be good results for the sector. And this is on solar and storage. So in this particular project, it was around 235,000 main fund. We fitted smart batteries in homes already with solar specifics. And again, we did things slightly differently from the other community energy project in order to get that final research project. In here, we left a lot of information with the homes, so next to the consumer unit. So we didn't specifically give it to tenants, which then gets lost. So that was one of the unique things for this. It was both a tech and a people solution. So some of the hardware was funded here, some of the time for the main participants was also funded. And just to give you an example, this was our third battery project, and it's one where us as an organisation are doing a lot more of the asset management and of the commissioning, and it's no longer the battery provider who has sort of black box secret of how things work. So we've done most of this. And one of the best things with this particular project, those pictures are actually the wrong way round. On the front of our battery, we've just got that battery symbol. So I say we've got a tech and a people solution to what we're doing. Energise Barnsley have been upskilled to go then talk to the tenants and signpost them for other services with data which we've given them. But in particular, the tenants understand, and this is all elderly residents, what the battery's doing seasonally because of our LED lights at the front. Go on to the next fund, next slide. Yeah, so that's just the tech side of it. So for each installation, we have all this data, and you can see we've got saving some batteries, saving some PV, and the AGK team have that when they go and see tenants. In addition, if they need additionality to the type of savings they're making. And we've had MPs come out and lots of happy tenants for that project. So it's been a real joy to work with a collaboration agreement with the other partners under the main fund. Next one. So we applied to the Innovation Fund, and our million is for capital costs. The innovation part of this, if you go back to any original low carbon installations, say typically solar, then they had payback periods, i.e. if you put the money in when from the fit, when it would pay back what you had, and typically you had 7-8 years. Some ground mounted was 2 or 3 years or 4 years in the early days. But broadly what we're saying is those original installations have paid back the landlord, whoever put the capital in. So in our case, it was Barnsley Council. Now with those same installations, we've still got 13.5, 14 years of revenue left because they were 25-year fit, some might be 20s. This can happen everywhere else. So in this particular project, the innovative part of it is that revenue is assigned to Energise Barnsley, future revenue, and against that, we're going to raise a bond, 3.25 million, in order to put solar PV on 1,000 new homes. So if you just go back to that revenue which comes in per year, those original installations, it can only pay for a small amount of homes. In this particular case, it was 80. But due to the strength of community energy, the ability to clearly articulate the social, environmental, and a fair financial return, we're able to raise that money and also contractually receive the future income from those original installations. So it's something which can be replicated everywhere else, because there's a lot of landlords, particularly social housing landlords, who didn't do rent to roof but paid for their own installations. And those monies, the revenue from it, they're not going to anything dedicated net zero. They might be going to a housing account or something, or you just can't scale. And the other aspect of this, particularly in social housing, is that Energise Barnsley will now asset manage those original installations, because it is, in our experience, you have a high amount of systems which are offline when it's not managed with a end funder in mind. So that is the innovation, fit for solar, recycling of fit income, and those homes are going to have the PV. Again, it won't be subsidised solar, it'll be completely free to them. It's on the same deal which those tenants in 2013 got when it's in operation. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Andy. Just a heads up, you've got a couple of minutes. That's all right.
I think it's thank you slide. So like I said, look, great cheerleader, really good team at EST. clear instructions on the application form. It's got these rolling dates. It plays to our strengths. Folk at the other end know what we do. So let's make the most out of it. Have some good applications. And it's not state aid. One other thing, actually, before I forgot, actually during the project, where we had some costs because it was pre-COVID and the costs went up, the kind of golden rule was you can't increase the grant which you've got from them, but what you do under the bonnet, if you justify it perhaps on a quarterly submission with a reason for doing it, there's a bit of flexibility there. So I know it's hard sometimes to put in all your costs when applying, but we have found that there is under the bonnet of the actual whatever grant you got, the ability to perhaps pull a few things around with good justification, because things do change in terms of costings and prices. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Andy. We're going on to the question and answer part of the presentation and session now. So I will stop sharing my screen so that we can all see each other if we'd like to. And we've got a few questions that have come through. So I'll stop sharing my screen and then start with those. Thank you to our presenters. If you do have any further questions that come through, please pop them into the chat. This is doing a fabulous job of taking those. There was one that came through, just I thought it made sense to kind of start with this, which was I think Mike from Chase Community Solar was asking about the pre-registration of the Redress Fund, and also an additional question about feasibility. Okay, so I guess Graham, maybe best for you to speak to this, or also Andy if you want to chip in. But Mike was asking about the pre-registration. Does an organisation have to answer all of the management criteria positively to be accepted? Yeah, and I don't know, Graham, if you want to speak to the financial due diligence check that you mentioned is involved in the pre-registration as well. So to access the fund, just to clarify, people have to pre-register with Energy Savings Trust, and there are some checks that are done at that stage to help you. Totally access fund. So I'll pass on to you, Graham, if there's anything around that.
Yeah. So from memory, I don't think you have to tick every box, and just for benefit of everyone else, in the pre-registration form there's a bunch of check boxes about what policies do you have and what insurances do you have and all of that kind of thing. I think I don't think there are very many of those that are kind of definitely a no if you don't check it. Basically the test that we do, we look at the kind of online public information to check that every organization is who they say they are and have the correct status, because we do sometimes get people applying that don't have the right legal status. And then there's a basic financial due diligence that we do, which is, it's basically looking at how much you have in the way of reserves compared to how much your turnover is. And so if your turnover is very small, we wouldn't expect the reserves to be very big, but it's just to check that organizations are kind of a going concern and there's enough money in the bank to kind of wind things up sensibly if everything went wrong. It's just that basic, we're required in the contract to do some basic financial due diligence. We do, if you're refused at registration stage, then you can come back to us, because occasionally it's like there's something in somebody's accounts that's really confusing and it's very difficult to kind of fathom out. So we do give people a right of reply if if there's something in there that is complicated. So yeah, we try and be as human about that as possible. We do also in there ask people what sort of thing you're going to apply for, and we just put that in there because it's a good way of stopping people applying for things that are completely out of scope. We don't want people to go through the effort of doing a whole application for something that's just outside the scheme scope. So we ask people at that stage, and we'll give them feedback, and we'll kind of say, look, that's not actually within scope, and it's a good way of just not wasting people's time. So yeah, it's those basic checks. What was the other question? Oh, about feasibility. So yes, we can fund feasibility studies, and we have funded feasibility studies. I think with all of those sorts of things, definitely try and be as clear as possible about what might happen next, because we know, we get some applications potentially for quite large sums of money that are about developing business models and feasibility and that kind of earlier stage stuff. There are some of those that we've funded and some that we haven't funded, and the ones that we funded tend to be the ones that are really clear about, this consultancy work will actually get us to this point, that this is what's going to happen next, this is the size of the prize, this is how it's going to move us forward. So the kind of better story that you can tell about all of that, the more robust. I guess try and work on helping the assessors to be as confident as possible that putting that money towards what you're doing is going to make a difference, is going to have a real impact. We do understand that sometimes feasibilities say no, but obviously the more that you can do to kind of say, look, there is definitely an opportunity here, and we're trying to and that you're clear about what the impact could be.
Wonderful, thank you for that, Graham. Mike, if there's anything in addition to that question that you wanted to ask on that, please do pop it in the chat. I hope that's covered what you were mentioning. I just popped some information from a call that we had with Graham last week, just on the financial due diligence track record, to give groups a bit of an idea of what the EST is looking for. And please do correct me, Graham, but being able to cover running costs for approximately 3 months without receipt of the grant funding is like kind of an idea on terms of that financial due diligence of the organisation that the EST is kind of looking for. There was another question that was from Nadia from Chelsea, asking about the main fund and kind of why it was only open to charities. But Andy, your application was for the main fund, am I right? So maybe if there is anything you both want to touch on around how community energy groups might be able to access the main and the small funds, which require charity involvement as well. So is there room for community energy groups to get involved with that if they work in partnership, for example?
So go on.
Carry on, Andy, if you want to.
I was just going to answer the question in the chat, which is part of that conversation about match funding. Because when we did partner with the charity to apply for the main fund, that was prior to the specialists being open to CBS or KIC being able to lead it. And in that particular case, we did get match funding in of 35,000 in actual monies and 15,000 in officer time. So this was at the council level in order to strengthen our application to it. We haven't done that in this innovation thing. We've taken a slightly different thing, which is actually we cleared the decks and just given a clear capital funding and what the EST will get in return for their monies in terms of homes in fuel poverty receiving solar PV. So that's how we've taken an approach with both funds. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, so I guess just to answer the question about why not the main fund, I guess initially it was only charities that could apply to redress at all, and actually Community Energy England engaged with Ofgem about the opportunity for community energy groups to apply, and Ofgem made the decision to open up the Innovation and Carbon Emissions Fund to community energy groups. I think Duncan has posted that there's kind of ongoing conversation between CE and Ofgem, or at least another approach to Ofgem about that. I think I guess the position that we've always taken, that we have to work to the Ofgem rules, and so we have kind of tried to say to the community energy sector that you can partner if you've got a lead who is a charity. You can partner, and then you can be part of an application to the main fund. I guess we need to be clear that the charity has a kind of meaningful role there, obviously, to be fair to everyone else. So we need to make sure that there's kind of sensible governance there, because our only actual legal agreement will be with the lead organisation. But I do think, you know, we get quite a lot of applications from charities that are not necessarily energy specialists, but work with a very vulnerable group and have really good reach to that group and really good understanding of that group. And sometimes those applications aren't successful because the organisation doesn't have the knowledge and experience of delivering community energy, and so the application, you can see potential flaws with how it might actually work. So there's definitely real opportunities there for those of you that have got the experience and the capacity to be doing energy advice, for example, to kind of work with a charity, and hopefully later on in the new year we'll go back to doing some face-to-face meetings, because we do often feel like there's real benefit to be had from lots of the organizations that are applying, actually meeting each other and talking a bit more, because particularly energy advice, we know that people get pushed into kind of competing with each other in a locality, and I think the more that we can put people in touch to, and we do try and encourage people to work sensibly alongside each other, just because we know that there is a potential for redress to kind of be part of that, pushing people into competition, and we'd much rather see that people are trying to be greater in the sum of their parts if possible.
Thank you for that, Graham. And just to double check there, so Aldous' question, building retrofit is eligible with the funds if they want to work in partnership with a charity. The key thing is that the charity has some sort of very definite role within that. So it's not just that they're partnering to access the fund. There needs to be some demonstrated kind of service provision and separation of work that the charity takes.
Yes, because the funding would always have to go through the grantee, which would be a charity, and so we need to see that there's a meaningful role there. Really, I guess we look at the governance from the practicalities of delivering the project, and we don't want to fund anything where there's potential for subcontractors to end up in a horrible situation, or the grantee, or we try to think about those practicalities of actually how a project gets delivered. I guess the thing to say is that retrofit wouldn't necessarily have to just go through the main fund. So the main fund is specifically for energy consumers in vulnerable situations, but if you were doing retrofit through the Innovation Fund, certainly, and I think possibly the Carbon Emissions Fund, we have funded a number of projects that are like trying to work on a replicable approach to grow deep retrofit. So we can, that's the sort of thing that a community group could apply for. But I think also, I mentioned earlier, community renewables is within scope. A lot of the we can definitely fund capital, and we can fund capital for renewables. Part of the reason that we haven't funded more is A, because we don't get that many applications for that sort of thing, and B, because sometimes when we get those applications, we get an application for we want 100% funding to do a fairly bog standard renewables installation, and the way that we've structured the criteria is that we really want to try to fund things that will push the dial net zero wise, and if we're 100% funding a capital project, it's not really very replicable. It means that anyone else that looks at it goes, well, of course your business model worked because somebody else paid for the installation. So where we have been able to fund those, and Andy's is a good example, really, that it's a project where you could see this is a chunk of money that goes in, but actually a lot of the money comes from elsewhere. And this is a chunk of money that helps that business model to work, and that then enables, it unlocks all this other funding that can come in. And also the project was kind of able to give quite detailed information about the replication potential. What other organizations are there that might be in this situation of being able to do that? So, if you've got a community renewables project that you can show is going to benefit energy consumers by empowering them, by reducing the bills, by whatever, maybe creating a community fund. If it's like we need an injection of cash up front to help this business model to work, that's the sort of stuff that we can potentially fund. depending on how much money's in the pot, obviously. I should also say that Andy's is one of the biggest grants. It's not the biggest, but it's up there with the bigger ones that we've funded. We fund a lot of stuff. The minimum grant in the small grants is 20,000. Yeah, between 20 and 50,000 is kind of the lower end of what we fund.
On that, so one of my tips is there's no better way of doing a good application than failing in lots of others previously. It's the way of the world. And also,
carry on, Andy. Sorry.
And also, I've discussed with you before in terms of in our main fund, when we went for 75 batteries, you know, there's a question of why, and it's because of the ability to scale and data. So of those 75 in, we're seeing permanently 72 online, the evidence we need, and 3 which might have comms problem, 1 that might have had electrical installer go in and change something off. But yeah, it was a good conversation with you. You know, why are you not doing 20 or 25? Well, because if you are going to go ahead and scale this thing, you need good data, good numbers. I enjoyed that conversation.
Yeah, it's really helpful to have and that's the assessors that we have and the panel that we have do ask those kinds of sort of searching questions of things about what, you know, why are we doing it? What's the, you know, what are the practicalities of delivering it? And just to echo what Andy was saying, we don't automatically give feedback to everybody because, well, the scheme has grown. We had 144 applications to the last round, which was our biggest ever. 120, the one before that was the previous biggest ever. And, you know, we started out with more like 40 or 50 applications. So there is quite a lot to get through. But we do offer that we'll give feedback to anyone that asks, and we do have a lot of grantees who, so, you know, if you've made an application and not been successful, it's fine to ask for feedback. We have a lot of grantees who've applied sometimes several times, had feedback, and you know, they've implemented the feedback and been successful. So yeah, we're happy to do that for people.
Thank you very much for that, Graham. I know that we asked some questions coming into this call around whether people had made applications before, and I think about 50% of people that are attending have made applications and been unsuccessful. So we will we'll support with that connection to EST for groups that would like to get more bespoke feedback. So thank you for that offer. Just on that, there's a few questions around like practicalities of when the next fund is and you know, advice in terms of, are there certain funds that are oversubscribed and things to aim for or things like that. But before I touch on those practical questions, just because there was a talk of measuring success and the importance of evidencing, there was a question earlier on about, I'm just trying to find who asked it. It was about yeah, I will ask the other questions so I find that one. So there's some more practical questions from, I believe, Sarah at Bath and West about any idea when the next round is coming out, and are there any funds that you'd recommend that are less subscribed or like less popular and technical?
So at the minute, there is nothing I can tell you about the next fund, which is just purely because details of all of that stuff are being finalized at the minute, and we just need to be careful about trying to make sure that we release the information to everyone at the same time, so there's not an accusation of anyone getting advantage. But we announce that to everyone who's registered. So, you know, if you're registered with the scheme, you'll hear about that straight away. We also then put it out in the public domain, and we'll make sure that we communicate it with Community Energy England as soon as that's available. But I mean, so that schedule that I gave, we try to stick quite close to that, with the caveat that there may sometimes be a situation where we actually have to miss a quarter, depending on availability of money and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I wish I could tell you something more definite right now, but I can't just yet. But hopefully very shortly we will be able to. And that's part of the reason that we get people to pre-register, so that we can definitely, you know, let everyone that's interested know. Just on the, is there anything to steer you at? I would say Carbon Emissions Fund and Innovation Fund, they're the ones that we've had, that we generally have the lower level of applications for. But I think probably partly because a lot of the charitable sector is working, well, certainly at the minute, is working to support vulnerable people, and so clearly, you know, those are hugely oversubscribed at the minute. But you know, since we set them up, actually, we've had a lower level of applications into the Innovations Fund and the Carbon Emissions Fund than I'd have expected, I guess. So yeah, we're hoping that lots of you will be able to come in for that.
Wonderful.
And just on validating results, so in our project, we've got the NEA as our academic partner, research partner. So they'll run projects themselves and have done for ages, but they're working really well. And I know Mike's the same with us, with a two-way flow of information back and forth, and doing their qualitative interviews with our tenants. So it's something which we really look forward to at the end of the 2 years, that final research project, you know, which will be then open up to the rest of the sector as well, to see what's gone well and what's, you know, what needs more learning on for our particular sector. Because sometimes, you know, we've worked with Oxford Brookes universities and others, they take different steers, but for specific nature of this particular project and the time and the cost, you know, really enjoyed working with them. It's been beneficial.
Thank you for that, Andy. I was going to say there was a question in the chat around if the EST had any steer on how value is measured in things like energy advice. So what evidencing are you looking for that you want to see in applications?
So I think we for energy advice projects, there's a specific targets table for how many people you're going to reach via what types of different interventions. We get the vast majority of what we get on almost all of what we get, to be honest, on the main fund and the small grants fund is energy advice. And so that makes the decision very difficult. So we do, the application form is partly structured around how do we tease that apart? How do we make sure that we're funding the projects with the best chance of succeeding, that have got, you know, they're going to deliver the most impact for the money and all of that kind of stuff. We are very aware of the difficulties of being able to quantify things, so we do try and be a little bit realistic about that. So on the advice projects, you know, an ideal application gives us a good set of targets on how many of different types of interventions are we going to deliver, and also then shows that they're going to try and kind of monitor what the positive impact is for the actual households. If people can set energy savings and carbon targets, great, but we know that can be very difficult to do. And if you're going to do that, it's better if you can show, you know, that it's not a number plucked out of the air, it's credible, this is how we're going to monitor it, and that kind of thing. We get very, very few applications that are actually doing in-home monitoring. And you could potentially, you know, you could fund the in-home monitoring if you wanted to test something out and see what the actual impact is for households. So we don't get very many that do that, but it is, you know, it's there as something that you could fund. So I think we want to try and be able to quantify it as much as possible, but we do appreciate there's some stuff that's just difficult to quantify. There's one or two projects we funded, quite substantial projects we funded, that are relatively early stage, that are testing business models and that kind of stuff, and therefore didn't necessarily say we're going to reach loads and loads of people, and you know, didn't have much in the way of numbers. But where those projects have been successful, it's generally where they've been able to be really, really clear about, this is the problem, this is how your money is going to help to fix that problem, this is the number of, or an idea of the scale of other organizations that could then do this similar thing, and so how much impact can it have, and the more that you can explain that, the better. And the reason that we are encounters about this stuff is not just to be a pain, it's really to try and, because I've been in meetings with government representatives in the past where they've kind of said, well, where's the evidence for this? And there seem to have been a lot of programs that don't gather that evidence, and so what we're trying to do is be able to collect this and then communicate it out, so that we can start to say, you know, putting in this amount of grant funding unlocked you know, this many kilowatts of installed capacity, you know, helped this many households, deliver this amount of savings. And the more that we can do that, hopefully, you know, the more that we can share all that information back with all of you, and it's ammunition to then go and engage with policymakers, with private sector, with anyone else to put more money into all of this stuff, really.
The quarterly reporting is not onerous either. So sometimes the project grants become bigger than the actual project itself. If anybody, you know, who's applied for European money or anything else. But this, once you've got used to the first 1 or 2 quarters and your officer at the other end, you know, it's just sits next to the project, you know, which is really, really good.
Thank you very much.
That's good to hear. Thank you.
I'm just aware that we are coming up to 1 o'clock, so I just would like to finish with a few very specific questions that have come into the chat around whether they look like they might be eligible, and it might be something to pick up after this call. But if we could, yeah, just lightly touch on them, and then we'll do a brief ending before we close the call. So there was a mention of solar PV on a local hospice, which I believe, from what you said, Graham, could come under either the innovation or the carbon reduction if it fits the other criteria.
Yeah.
There was also a question from Mike around, would the fund be looking to pay for maybe like a part of a project, so the energy audit's part of a broader retrofit project, example, or do you want? Yeah.
Could do. Yeah. Yep. Certainly. With those sorts of things, I guess just be a little bit careful about, we can't joint brand with anything from an energy company. So if you're working with a DNO, because it affects DNOs as well as energy suppliers, or major generators in particular, because they're all Ofgem licensees, we can fund stuff that works alongside things, but we have to be careful of any joint branding, because then you could have one supplier accusing another supplier of trying to, you know, break the rules and get extra money out of redress. So it's just, yeah, we can work alongside all of those kinds of things. But yeah, certainly we can fund a part of a wider initiative. We do quite a lot of that. And I think that speaks to what I was saying earlier, that if it's a part of a wider initiative, that's fine. Just be really clear about which is the bit that you're asking for redress, what are the benefits of that, and all of that kind of stuff. Make sure you give enough information about the bit you're asking for funding for.
Yeah, could you fund 50-50 with a householder, you know, can enable to pay sector, so we you know, get 50% grant, encourage people to do the energy audits, but not fund it freely, because, you know, we want them to put some money in to value it.
Yeah, so we can fund projects that provide an incentive to householders, and again, that will be looked at in terms of, is that incentive reasonable and proportionate? And so, you know, any evidence that you can provide to say this is why we've done this, then great. If it, you know, exactly as you say, if it was 100% funding a small number of households, then questions immediately get asked there about kind of fairness and proportionality and all that kind of thing. But yeah, if you're arguing this incentive to help people invest their own money, then yeah, those sorts of things can be within scope.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that. I just want to say, I'm aware that we haven't got around to all the questions today, so thank you very much for sending those. What we will be doing is, sorry, Graham.
I was just going to say, if anybody does have questions after, you can use, on my last slide, there's a energyredress@est.org.uk address, that's the best way of asking questions. If you want, we can book up a call as a result of those emails, but that email gets checked every day and there's a whole team looking at it. So that's the best way of making sure you get through to us and asking questions. But sorry, Cameron.
No, thank you very much for that offer, Graham. So what we are going to be doing, any questions that have not been answered, there will be a follow-up email to this call, and we'll pass those questions on to both Andy and Graham, so that if they have time, they can ensure that we get some feedback for you. You will also got an invitation to Loomio, our online practitioner forum, so we will be starting a thread on Loomio specifically for this call, so access to all the slides, the recording, and questions. If you have any further questions, you can also pop them on there, so that's there as a living record of the call. So you will also have all of those things. I just want to say a massive thank you to both of our speakers, and to everyone attending for all your questions, and for Lisa for clocking all the questions and popping them into answering as many as we can. The final thing I'll just do before we round up is a very quick summary of other resources that are available to you through Community Energy England. So just as we close off, so further resources and support that are available, just to make sure that you are aware going into the end of the year. One of the resources that has been really taken up fantastically across the sector and beyond is our new national map. So this launched in summer of this year, and it's currently getting about 5,000 monthly views, which is amazing. So it's to let you know that this map exists of all community energy projects across the country. We're aware that it's an ever-growing project map. So if you have projects that are not on there, please go to the Community Energy England website and add them to it. We'll send that as a further link after this call, but it's a great way to gain visibility with a resource that's gaining a lot of attention right now. We also have our funding database, which is ever growing. So more information on the Redress Fund is in there and other funds that you can access. So please check that out on our funding page on our website. There is also a spreadsheet which has local authority funds and other funds which might not be on the website. So go and check that out as well. We're trying to update it as often as possible. So if you see funds that are not on there, please also share them with the sector. That would be really helpful. Just a bit of a plug of we've just done our 3 autumn courses with National Energy Action to help get groups trained in energy advice for the sector. If you are interested in any advice, our autumn courses are now completed, but we're very interested to hear if groups are looking to get more training. So please do send us an email if you are looking for training with National Energy Action, and we'll let you know as and if we can offer more training to the sector. The final thing is we have events and publicity. Thank you very much for attending today. And make sure that on the back of it, let us know if you do not have an invitation to Loomio. We'll make sure you get onto the online forum, which is where you can access all the slides and recordings, as well as the email that will be coming after this. So thank you very much to everyone. These slides will also have the links for lots of different resources that you can access, as you can see here. So if you need anything else, please do get in touch with our team. Please do get in touch with our team. You can email us at members@Community Energy England, and please follow up with us if you have any further questions. And I will now stop sharing my slides and just say a huge thank you to everyone for attending today. And I hope you all were about to go and have our Christmas dinner. So I hope that everyone has a lovely rest of the afternoon, and please do let us know if you need anything else. It's a privilege to share the hour with you, and thank you for being part of Community Energy England and the National Network. Thank you to Graham and to Andy in particular for coming along today. That was really appreciated. And we'll see you all shortly.
Thanks, Shannon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.